When I was 9 years old, my parents let me go trick-or-treating without them for the first time ever. I went with my best friend at the time, Mikey, who was also 9. We were to be back home by 9 o'clock, the latest though. I think it was getting close to that point when we were still out trick-or-treating. Trick-or-treating was a little worse in our town, because properties were so big that it meant more walking for less candy. We came to one house which sat on the corner and was isolated by a set of tall bushes. We rang the bell as usual. I still remember it so clearly. You're about to find out why that is. An older man opens the door, probably in his mid-50s, thin greyish hair and a moustache. He asks what our costumes are and talks down to us like we're 6 instead of 9. He asked us was there anyone else with us. He seemed surprised that our parents weren't with us. Then he opened the door completely to reveal some kind of obstacle course tunnel that he had set up in his living room. It was made of cardboard boxes and Halloween decorations. Admittedly, it looked cool, and when he said in order to get our candy, we'd have to make it through the obstacle course. It was very tempting. Mikey and I looked at each other and said okay. The man told us to come in, but he didn't look at us. He said it instead. He looked outside as he slowly shut the door. I crawled into that tunnel made out of boxes first, and Mikey followed behind me. It was really dark inside the tunnel, since the man had only some dim orange Halloween lights in the room. There was fake spider webs and other Halloween toys scattered throughout the box tunnel. It was actually really big and well put together, because we struggled to find the way to the other end. But when we did, it led into a small room, also lit up by orange Halloween candles. There was a note in this room, pointing to a door saying "Candy down there." He went to open the door, revealing stairs to the basement. There was more orange lights down there. The man was nowhere to be seen though. Me and Mikey started making our way down the stairs. When we got to the bottom, we saw nothing but a big empty basement. Then the door above slammed shut. We went back up the stairs to try and open it, but it was locked. We didn't know what to do, other than cry for help. But we stopped when we heard the doorbell ring upstairs. It rang repeatedly actually. We listened by the basement door to hear anything, and we heard what sounded like the front door opening. So we started screaming at the top of our lungs. Then there was commotion outside the basement, like 2 men yelling at each other. Before the door in front of us was unlocked and opened, and a man and woman came up to us. The woman hugged us and told us to follow them out of the house. We followed the couple through the living room, passing the man in the corner of the room, standing over his freakish creation. The husband called the man a sick freak, and we left the house. The couple took us up to their house, where the husband called the cops, and the wife stayed with us asking questions like what the man said to get us inside his house. Apparently they seen us going to the man's house because they live across the street. The cops arrived and there was an overwhelming amount of evidence for him to be arrested and tried. Of course, at that age of 9 we didn't understand the depth of the situation. But looking back now, we're all happy that the neighbours came to our rescue and justice was served that night. When I was 19, I lived at home with my parents. This happened on Halloween, and like every other year, my parents had me hand out candy to the kids that came. I didn't mind. Our living room was right next to the front door, so I just put on a movie and get up whenever the doorbell rang. It was about 10 p.m. The doorbell rings were slowing down. By this point, both of my parents had gone to bed. I remember this almost perfectly. I was on the last scene of The Dark Knight when our home phone rang. I looked over to the left where the phone was. Unknown caller, that's all it said. Now literally, just the other day, we got a new set of phones. We were given a new number and hadn't given it out to anyone. So I doubted it was someone I knew, but I still thought I'd answer, just in case. I picked it up, said hello. All I could hear was heavy breathing. I hung up. I figured they had the wrong number. Shortly after, the phone went off again. I said the same thing, unknown caller. I picked it up again. Who is this? This time a male voice replied, I know where you live. I hung up again. Stopped to think for a second. I was starting to realise that it was probably just someone trying to prank call me. I mean, it was Halloween night. I can't even blame them, but at the same time that's something you'd expect from a kid, or very most a teenager. And from what it sounded like, whoever was at the other end of that line was much older than a teenager. Over the course of the next 10 minutes, 6 or 7 more phone calls came in. Finally, I picked it up again. This time I didn't say anything. There was a few seconds of silence before the man started talking. I'll be honest, I don't remember exactly what he said, but it was something like how the guy was outside our house and that I needed to unlock the door so he could get in. He said that if we called the cops, he was going to kill everyone inside before they could arrive. Then the line went dead. I was basically fully convinced at this point that it wasn't a prank call. I went into the kitchen, crawling on all fours, to stand out of view of any of the windows. I grabbed the largest knife I could find, and with knife in hand I crawled to my parents' room and shook awake my dad. I whispered to him that someone was outside near the back door. He immediately got out of bed and grabbed his loaded revolver. We crept through the house. I better explain the situation. I told him all about the phone calls. When he got to the back door, he unlocked it, stepped outside, and with no hesitation shot one bullet in the air, and right as he did, 3 men popped out from a set of bushes right up against the house. They started sprinting away, right into the forest our house was backed up to. My dad chased them for a bit, but they were much faster than him. They disappeared into the trees. We never saw them again. We have no idea who they were. We called the police and told them, but there was nothing they could do. We still don't know how they got our phone number or what they wanted. This happened last year on Halloween. I was 18 at the time, and my best friend Michael was 17. We both knew that we were too old for trick-or-treating, but we also knew that handing out candy was no fun either. That's when Michael came up with an idea. There was an old abandoned house that was close to mine, and we always said we'd like to explore it at some point. We figured, what better night than Halloween? We waited until it got dark, and then waited even more until there was much less trick-or-treaters outside. That's when we grabbed a couple of flashlights and headed out. It took us a few minutes, but eventually we got to the house. Of course, since it was abandoned, it was a huge mess. Trash was scattered around the floor, windows were boarded up, and you'd get the picture. We walked into the front door, was half expecting it to be locked, but it opened. It was pitch black inside. Then we stepped inside. Our flashlights didn't light up much, so we did our best we could in looking around. The house had 2 floors. We explored everything on the bottom and didn't find anything interesting, so we went upstairs. Up there we immediately saw 2 rooms. Michael went into one on the right, and I went into the one on the left. I started exploring it, looking in drawers, in the closet, still nothing of interest. I remember I was looking out the window, and all of a sudden I heard a blood-curdling scream. It came from the other room. It was Michael. I ran over to the room that he was in. Initially, I didn't see anything. That was until I put my flashlight in the back left-hand corner of the room. There was Michael. He had an arm around his neck. Someone wearing all black with a Halloween mask had Michael in a chokehold. I could tell his face was turning red, so I did the only thing I could think of, and I threw my flashlight as hard as I could at the person. I managed to strike him in the side. He let go of Michael and shouted out in pain, holding his side. Now with no light we ran downstairs. We managed to stumble out of the house in the dark. When we got out we ran, but not before looking back. Lit only by the moonlight, we saw 3 figures standing in the upstairs window, looking down at us, all of them wearing the same Halloween mask. We turned back around and ran even faster. We finally stopped when we made it back to my driveway. I bent over, breathing heavily. Neither of us knew what to think or do. We had no idea what we just came across. Later that night, Michael told me what happened when he entered that room. He got in there and started exploring it like every other room. After a while, he noticed something in the corner, shone his flashlight at it, and saw that it was a Halloween mask. He walked over to it, thinking it was propped up against the wall. It slightly moved, and that's when he realised it was a person. He screamed out, but was quickly put in a chokehold. That's when I came in. What disturbs me the most is how Michael described being held. He said whoever was in the mask had to be using all of his force on his neck. He wasn't just being restrained, he genuinely couldn't breathe for the good 20 seconds or so that he was held there. Like I said before, we don't know what we came across. We don't know what those guys were doing. But we both agree it was something we weren't supposed to see. I truly believe we were almost killed that night.